The first encounter. The sky was dark, covered with thick clouds of smoke. The air smelled like burning metal, and something worse, something like death. Broken buildings stood all around, their walls covered with deep claw marks. The ground was wet, but not from rain. It was from red and green blood, mixing together like dirty water. A small alien girl sat inside the corner of a broken house. Her thin arms hugged her knees. Her skin was light blue, almost glowing in the darkness. Her big black eyes were full of fear. Her long ears twitched at every small sound. Her world was gone. Her family, her friends, her home. Everything destroyed by war. And now something was coming. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, and strong. Each step made a small splash in the blood and mud outside. The alien girl held her breath. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought it would break her chest. She knew these footsteps. Every alien child knew them. A human was coming. In her world, humans were monsters. They came from the sky with loud machines and bright weapons. They burned cities, crushed armies, and took whatever they wanted. The stories said humans did not just kill aliens. They ate them. They drank alien blood to make themselves stronger. They used alien bones to make their weapons sharper. Every alien child was told, if you see a human, run. If you cannot run, hide. If you cannot hide, die with honor. But she could not run. Her legs were weak. Her body was hungry. And her spirit was already broken. The footsteps stopped outside the broken house. The air became cold, as if the human carried death with him. A shadow stood in the doorway. It was taller than any alien she had seen. Its body was covered with dark armor, scratched and dirty, but still strong. Its face was hidden under a helmet with a dark visor. The girl could not see its eyes, but she felt them. She knew they were watching her, looking at her like food. The human stepped inside. The floor creaked under his heavy boots. The girl closed her eyes. She knew what would happen next. The human would grab her, break her small body, and eat her piece by piece. Maybe if she was lucky, it would be quick. But nothing happened. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The human was not reaching for her. His hands were not holding a weapon. Instead, he was kneeling down. One hand opened a small bag on his belt. From inside, he pulled out a silver packet. He tore it open and held it out toward her. Food. The smell hit her nose. Salty, a little sweet, and completely alien. It was not alien food. It was human food. She stared at the packet, confused. What was this? A trick. Did humans make aliens fat before eating them? Or was this human just playing with his food? The human said nothing. His voice did not come. He only held the packet, waiting. Her stomach growled loudly. Hunger was stronger than fear, stronger than questions. Slowly, her small hand reached out. Her fingers touched the packet. The human did not move. He did not grab her. He just let her take the food. She brought it to her mouth and took a small bite. It was strange, but it was food. Real food. It did not burn her mouth or make her sick. She took another bite, then another, until the packet was empty. The human stood up, but still said nothing. His helmet turned slightly, like he was listening to something far away. Then he walked back to the doorway and stood there, watching the empty street outside. The girl's heart was still beating fast, but now for a different reason. She was not sure if she was still in danger or not. This human did not act like the monsters from the stories. He did not kill her, did not hurt her, did not eat her. He gave her food. Real food. Why? The girl stayed in the corner, too afraid to speak. The human stayed at the door, like a silent guardian. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Then, without warning, the human turned his head toward her. His helmet visor caught the light, glowing for a second. He pointed outside and then back at her. It was a simple gesture, but she understood. He wanted her to come with him. She did not know why. She did not trust him, but she also knew if she stayed here alone, she would die. Monsters would come, or hunger would take her. The human was dangerous, but he was her only chance. Slowly, she stood up. Her legs shook, but she walked toward him. Step by step, closer to the monster who gave her food. She expected him to eat her any moment. But instead, the human turned, walked ahead, and left the door open for her to follow. And somehow, that was even more frightening. The silent journey. The night sky above was endless, but it gave no light. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the air carried the faint smell of burning metal. And something sour, something alien. A cold wind moved across the land, rustling through broken trees and shattered alien machines. Somewhere far away, something screamed. Not human, not alien, something worse. The small alien girl walked behind the human, her bare feet making soft sounds against the dirt and broken stone. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her legs were weak, her body was tired, and her mind was full of fear and questions. She could not understand why the human was not killing her. Every story she had heard since she was a child said the same thing. Humans are monsters. They do not leave survivors. They do not show mercy, and they certainly do not give food to alien children. Yet here she was, walking behind a human who had done all those things. The human never spoke. He walked with slow, steady steps, his heavy boots leaving deep prints in the wet ground. His dark armor was scratched and dented, each mark telling a story of battles fought and survived. A small device hung from his belt, its screen glowing softly with symbols, some human, some alien. She could not understand the words, but the light itself felt strange, almost alive. The girl stayed several steps behind him, her eyes never leaving his back. Every time he reached for his belt or adjusted his weapon, her body tensed. She expected him to turn around, grab her by the neck, and finally do what all humans were supposed to do, kill her. But he never did. Hours passed in silence. The only sounds were their footsteps and the distant roars of creatures hidden in the dark. The human did not seem afraid of them. Every time a sound echoed through the night, he would pause, stand very still, and listen. Then, without a word, he would start walking again, always choosing paths that kept them in the shadows, hidden from open ground. The girl could not understand. Why would a human care about hiding? Weren't humans the hunters? Weren't they the ones everyone else feared? Why would a hunter hide? Her stomach growled again, but she ignored it. The human had given her food once, but she did not know if he would again. Maybe it was a test. Maybe he wanted to see how long she could survive before she begged. And then he would strike. She had heard stories like that too. Suddenly, the human stopped. The girl froze, her breath caught in her throat. He raised one hand, fingers spread wide. A silent signal. She did not know what it meant, but her body understood. Stay still. Stay quiet. The air felt heavier. Something was nearby. The human slowly pulled a small black device from his belt. It was smooth and round with a dim green light on top. He held it up to his visor, and the green light grew brighter, casting a faint glow across his helmet. The girl squinted, trying to see what the device was showing him, but it was not for her eyes. Then she heard it. A low, wet breathing sound, coming from the trees ahead. The sound was deep, too deep for any normal creature. It was the sound of something large, something hungry, something that did not care if its meal was human or alien. The human lowered the device, and, for the first time, turned his helmet toward her. His hand moved again, 2 fingers pointing to the ground, then his palm pressing flat. She didn't understand the symbols, but the meaning was clear. Hide, stay low, don't move. She dropped to her knees, pressing her small body against the side of a broken machine. Her breath came fast and sharp, but she forced herself to stay silent. The human stepped forward, his body moving smoothly despite the heavy armor. His rifle was already in his hands, but he didn't fire. Not yet. The breathing sound came closer, followed by the sharp crack of branches breaking under something massive. The girl's hands covered her mouth, afraid even her breath would give them away. Through a crack in the broken metal, she saw it, a creature bigger than any she had seen before. Its skin was pale, almost white, stretched too tight over long, thin bones. Its mouth was too wide, filled with teeth like broken glass. Its black eyes reflected no light, no soul, only hunger. The human stood directly in its path. The creature sniffed the air, its long tongue flicking out, tasting the wind. It knew they were close. Its head turned slowly, bones cracking as it moved. It did not see the girl, yet. The human moved first. A soft, mechanical click echoed through the air, followed by a high-pitched pulse from his device. The creature froze, its head snapping toward the sound. Its body trembled, a strange mix of fear and anger twisting its features. It hissed, taking one step back. The human stood perfectly still, the glowing device raised high. The creature hissed again, louder this time, but it did not attack. Instead, it turned, its long body slithering back into the dark forest. The girl's heart raced. The creature was stronger, faster, but it ran from the human. Why? The human lowered the device and turned back toward the girl. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow again. She stood on shaky legs, questions burning in her mind, but none of them strong enough to break her silence. What was the device? Why did the monsters fear it? Why was a human helping her at all? But the biggest question of all, was she walking beside a savior or a different kind of monster? She followed him into the dark, not knowing if the real danger was ahead of her or walking right beside her. The enemy in the dark. The forest was alive with strange sounds, whispers carried by the wind, sharp clicks from unseen creatures, and the distant cry of something in pain. Every tree looked broken, as if giant hands had twisted their branches and ripped their leaves away. The ground was soft, covered in layers of ash and dead plants, and each step released a damp smell that clung to the air. The small alien girl followed the human through the maze of twisted trunks, her feet silent on the earth. Her toes curled with every step, her body tense like a string pulled too tight. Each second felt longer than the last. She didn't know where they were going or why the human had saved her. The only thing she knew was that the deeper they walked into the forest, the more dangerous it felt. The human never spoke, not even once. His dark armor blended with the shadows, and his footsteps were heavy but confident. He walked like someone who knew exactly where he was going. But even so, he moved carefully, his head turned from side to side, his helmet scanning every shadow, every broken branch, every whisper in the dark. The girl wanted to ask him so many things. Why did you help me? Why did you give me food? Why do monsters fear you? But fear kept her mouth shut. The stories of humans eating alien flesh were still too fresh in her mind. What if this was all part of the plan? What if he was only fattening her up before the feast? But another part of her, a small part, buried deep inside, felt something different. If he wanted to eat her, why protect her from the forest monsters? Why walk so slow, always making sure she could follow? Why did his body stand between her and danger? The girl's thoughts were broken by a sudden, sharp noise, the snap of a branch under something heavy. The human froze. His gloved hand rose into the air, a fist now instead of an open palm, a clear signal, even without words. Stop. The girl obeyed. She stood perfectly still, holding her breath, even though her heart pounded so loud she was sure something could hear it. Her wide, black eyes scanned the darkness ahead, but all she saw were shadows, moving, shifting, twisting like they were alive. The human lowered his hand and silently took his rifle from his back. It made no sound, no click, no hum. The weapon was as silent as the man who carried it. That was when the girl saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, low to the ground, reflecting pale white light. They blinked at different speeds, some slow, some too fast, like they were all controlled by different minds. The creatures were here. They came from the shadows, their thin bodies moving like broken puppets, all sharp angles and two long limbs. Their skin was dark and wet, like they had just crawled out of something rotten. Their mouths were wide, showing layers of teeth, some broken, some too sharp. The girl's knees shook, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen these monsters before. They were the scavengers, the feeders, the ones who came after the battles, crawling over dead bodies like insects, tearing apart whatever flesh was left. They did not care if their meal was human or alien. They only cared that it was warm. The human stepped forward. The creatures hissed, a sound like steam escaping broken pipes. One of them moved closer, walking on all fours like a starving wolf. Its head tilted, its empty eyes locked on the human's glowing device. The human did not raise his gun. Instead, his free hand touched the side of his helmet. A soft, high-pitched sound filled the air, like a distant scream, but not human, not alien. It was a sound the creatures knew. The nearest creature froze, its long claws digging into the dirt. The others stopped too, heads turning toward the human, teeth clicking together in strange, nervous patterns. They knew that sound. They feared it. The human took another step forward, the high-pitched tone rising slightly, becoming sharper. The creatures hissed again, but it was weaker now, like they were unsure. One by one, they began to step back, their bodies melting into the shadows. Their eyes disappeared first, then their thin limbs, until nothing remained but the cold air. The girl's breath returned, sharp and fast, like she had been underwater too long. Her legs felt weak, but somehow she stayed standing. The human turned his head slightly, just enough so the girl could see the side of his helmet. For a moment, she thought he would say something, but no words came. Instead, he reached into a small pocket on his belt and pulled out another silver packet. He held it out to her, just like before. The girl stared at it. Even after seeing the monsters retreat, even after seeing how they feared him, she still didn't understand. He was human. He was supposed to be the monster. Why was he feeding her again? Her small hand reached out, taking the packet. It was warm, like it had been heated by his own body. She opened it carefully and took a small bite. It tasted strange, but it was real food. The human turned away again, but this time he moved slower, giving her time to eat as they walked. The girl followed, her mind swirling with questions she couldn't ask. Every step deeper into the forest made her wonder, was the human protecting her from the monsters, or protecting the monsters from her? What power did he have to make them afraid? What was the sound, and why did it come from his helmet, like a ghost trapped inside metal? And most of all, why would a human, the monsters of every alien story, choose to save an alien child? The answers were somewhere ahead, waiting in the dark. But for now, all she could do was follow the silent human into the shadows, where the real monsters still waited, watching, listening, and fearing the man who walked beside her. The lost city. The forest began to change. The twisted trees became fewer, their broken branches stretching like fingers reaching for the sky. The ground turned harder, no longer soft with ash and dead leaves. The air itself felt heavier, thick with a strange energy. Something old, something forgotten. The alien girl could feel it in her bones. This place was not safe, but it was not because of monsters. It was something else, something her ancestors had left behind. A place of ghosts, not the kind that haunt the night, but the kind that haunt memories. The human walked ahead, his steps steady, his silence unbroken. The girl had grown used to the quiet, but here, in this strange place, the silence felt different. It was not the silence of someone who didn't want to speak. It was the silence of someone who knew that even his own voice might wake something best left sleeping. The trees finally opened, revealing what lay ahead. A city, ancient, broken, and long forgotten. Massive stone walls stretched into the sky, covered in thick vines and alien moss. The buildings were made of metal and rock, fused together in ways even her people could no longer understand. Statues stood half-buried in the ground, their faces worn away by time, but their shapes still clear. They were not human. They were alien, her people's ancestors. This was no random place. This was a place from stories. The Lost City. Every alien child knew the legend. Long ago, before the war, before humans came from the stars, this city had been a place of power. A place where her ancestors spoke to the sky, to the spirits, to the stars themselves. But something happened, something terrible. The city was abandoned, cursed, and left to the forest. No one ever returned. No one except this human. The girl's skin tingled with fear. Why did the human come here? How did he even know about this place? Her people didn't even speak of it anymore. It was a legend, a bedtime warning, a story to scare children into behaving. Yet the human walked through its gates like he belonged there. The human paused at the entrance. His helmeted head turned slowly, scanning the ruins. His hand hovered over the strange device on his belt, but he did not activate it. Not yet. Instead, he walked forward, not with caution, but with purpose, like someone returning to a home they thought they had lost. The girl followed, her small feet stepping carefully over broken stone and twisted roots. Every sound echoed, bouncing off ancient walls like whispers. She tried not to breathe too loud, afraid even the air might be watching. They walked deeper into the city, past crumbling buildings and fallen towers. Strange symbols covered the walls. Alien language mixed with something else. Something familiar. Human letters scratched into the stone beside alien carvings, like two hands writing the same story in different tongues. The girl's fingers traced one of the symbols, her mind trying to understand. The human stopped beside her. His glove rested on the stone, right next to her hand. There, carved into the wall, was something she never expected to see. A human handprint, pressed deep into the stone, surrounded by alien script. It was old, too old to belong to the man beside her. But it was a sign that humans had been here long before the war, long before the stories of monsters, long before everything. The human's fingers brushed the handprint, his gloved fingertips fitting perfectly into the ancient shape. The girl saw something then, just for a moment, the way his hand trembled slightly. It was the first time she saw something that made him seem real. Not a monster, not a ghost, just a man. They moved deeper into the heart of the city. At the center stood a large circular platform, half buried under dirt and broken stone. The platform glowed faintly, its edges marked with both alien and human symbols. It was a meeting place, a place where two species once stood side by side. The girl's mind could not understand it. The stories never said this. The stories said humans came from the sky and burned everything. But this place, this was no battlefield. This was something else. A memory of peace buried under the weight of war. The human knelt beside the platform, brushing dirt away with his hand. Slowly, carefully, he pressed the small glowing device from his belt onto the center of the platform. The symbols on the stone flickered, then glowed brighter. A soft hum filled the air, like the beating heart of a sleeping giant waking after a long, dark dream. The girl stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. What was this place? What was the human doing? How did he even know how to do this? The human stood, watching the platform as it came to life. Lights spread out from the center, tracing paths through the city, filling the air with soft blue and green glows. The girl could see images flickering in the light, faces, alien and human, standing together, building together, living together. The girl's eyes widened. This was no story. This was history. A history no one had told her. The human turned to her, and for the first time, he reached up and touched the side of his helmet. With a soft hiss, the helmet unlocked and lifted away. His face was pale, scared, and older than she expected. His eyes were tired, heavy with years of stories he could not speak. But there was something else in his face, something she had not seen in any human face before. Regret. The girl took a small step closer. What is this place? Her voice was soft, shaking with fear and wonder. The human's voice, when it came, was rough, as if he had not spoken in years. It was a promise, he said, his words simple, but full of weight. A promise we broke. The girl's heart ached, though she did not understand why. This human, this silent, deadly, mysterious man, was not the monster from her stories. He was something far more dangerous. He was a ghost from the past, carrying the weight of sins no child could understand. The lights flickered again, and somewhere deep beneath the city, something stirred, something old, something waiting. The girl did not know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she understood one thing. This human was not here to destroy. He was here to remember. Betrayal and truth. The lights from the ancient platform faded, but the silence that followed felt louder than any noise the girl had ever heard. She stood at the edge of the stone circle, her small fingers resting on the rough surface, her mind swimming with questions too large for her young heart to carry. The human stood with his helmet tucked under his arm, his face pale under the flickering light of the alien runes. His scars were old, cutting across his jaw, and cheek like faded memories burned into his skin. His eyes, though, were the part that made her chest feel strange, not with fear, but with confusion. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything. The girl had heard stories of human soldiers, cold, merciless, laughing as they burned alien homes and crushed alien bodies under their boots. But this man's eyes held no laughter. They held only ghosts. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he knew this place, why the monsters feared him. But the words stuck in her throat. She was still afraid, even now. Afraid that asking the wrong question might break the fragile peace between them. The human reached into his armor, pulling out a small metal device. Not a weapon, but something older, more personal. It was a simple rectangle, scratched and worn, with a cracked screen. The girl saw something moving on the screen. A photo. A face. Not human. An alien woman, her skin the same faint blue as the girl's, her smile soft and bright. The girl's breath caught in her chest. The woman looked familiar. The human's rough voice broke the silence. She was your mother. The words felt like thunder inside the girl's mind. Her knees went weak, and she stumbled back a step, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. How? How could a human know her mother? She shook her head, mouth opening, but no sound came. The human knelt down, placing the small device gently on the stone floor. The image flickered but remained clear, the alien woman's smile frozen in time. "We were friends," the human said softly, "before the war." The girl's mind spun. The war had always been there. In her short life, there was no before. There were only battles, destroyed cities, and stories of human monsters. But now, standing in the ruins of a forgotten city, with an ancient human soldier in front of her, the stories were cracking apart like old stone. "Friends," she whispered, her voice shaking. The human nodded. "I came here as part of a mission. Long before the armies, before the killing, I was part of a team. We came to study, not to fight. Your people welcomed us. They trusted us." He stopped, his hand closing into a fist on his knee. "We broke that trust." The girl felt cold, though the air was not cold. It was the kind of chill that came from realizing your entire world had been built on broken pieces, pieces no one ever told you about. "What happened?" she asked, her voice small. The human's jaw tightened, the muscles working under his scared skin. "There was an accident. We found something. Something buried under this city. Something ancient, dangerous. We were told not to touch it. But humans," he laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. Humans always touch. His fingers traced the edge of the ancient platform, brushing over alien symbols that glowed faintly under his touch. We woke something up, something too big to understand. The girl's eyes widened. The monsters. The human shook his head. No. Worse. He stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the stone floor. The monsters came after, feeding on the chaos. But what we woke up, it wasn't a creature. It was fear. The girl didn't understand. Fear. The human looked at her, and for a moment, his face softened, like a father trying to explain a nightmare to a child. We made your people afraid of us, and my people afraid of you. We turned fear into a weapon, and then we lost control of it. We didn't just break your cities. We broke your stories. The girl's hands clenched into fists. Her whole life had been built on those stories. Stories of human monsters, human murderers. But now, standing in this ancient place, she saw something terrifying. The stories were wrong. But why? Why did you come back? Her voice was louder now, shaking with anger and confusion. The human's shoulders slumped, the weight of years pressing down on his body. Because I made a promise. To her. He tapped the small device, the image of the alien woman glowing softly under his finger. I promised I would protect her people, no matter what. The girl's chest ached. Her mother had died when she was small, taken by the war, like so many others. She had no memories of her face, only stories from other villagers. But now, here in this ruined city, she saw her mother's face on a human screen, not as an enemy, but as a friend. You knew her, the girl said, her voice trembling. The human nodded. I loved her. The words felt too big for the girl's mind to hold. A human who was supposed to be a monster, had loved an alien woman. Her mother. The story didn't fit anywhere inside her head. It was too strange, too impossible. But the human's eyes were not lying. Before she could ask more, a sharp sound cut through the air, the crackling burst of a human radio signal. The human's helmet, still held under his arm, flickered with red light. A voice, harsh and cold, filled the air. Target confirmed. Ex-soldier identified. Orders remain. Terminate on sight. The girl's blood turned to ice. The human was not just a human. He was a traitor, hunted by his own kind. The girl's eyes filled with fear, but not for herself. For him. The human sighed, placing his helmet back over his head. The hiss of the seal locked him back into his armor. The scared man hidden once more behind cold metal. He looked down at the girl, his voice softer through the helmet speakers. They're coming. Who? The girl asked. Everyone. The human stepped back from the platform, the soft glow fading into darkness. Your people, my people, the monsters. They're all coming. And they all want the same thing. What? To make sure no one remembers the truth. The girl's breath caught in her throat. And in that moment, she knew. The human had not just saved her life. He had given her the most dangerous gift of all. The truth. The final stand. The sky above the ancient city was no longer dark. It was burning. Streaks of red fire fell from the clouds, not from storms, but from ships. Human ships, alien ships. Their engines roared like angry beasts as they tore through the sky, dropping closer with every second. The human stood at the edge of the platform, his helmet back in place, his rifle resting against his chest. His body was still, but the girl could feel the storm building inside him. The calm before the battle. The silence before the scream. The girl stood beside him, her small hands trembling, her heart pounding so loud it hurt her ribs. She didn't know what would happen next, but she could feel it. The weight of something too big for her small body to carry. War was coming. And they were standing at the center of it. The human's voice crackled softly through his helmet speakers. They'll be here soon. The girl's throat felt dry. Who? The helmet turned slightly, the visor catching the faint light of the glowing runes beneath their feet. Everyone. She didn't understand. Why? Why here? The human's fingers brushed the device on his belt, the one that had saved them from the monsters in the forest. Because this place, it remembers. His voice was softer now. And they want to make sure no one remembers anything ever again. The girl's eyes widened. The stories. The human nodded. The real stories. The ones they buried under fear and war. Before she could ask anything more, the ground trembled. It was not the earth shifting. It was the weight of machines. Heavy boots, metal legs, armored vehicles grinding across stone and dirt. The sound was everywhere, coming from every side. The human turned, his visor scanning the ruins, marking the movement of shadows between the broken buildings. The girl's breath caught in her throat when she saw them. Human soldiers. They moved like ghosts, their black armor blending with the dark ruins, their weapons held high and ready. Their helmets were smooth, soulless, with no faces visible, just empty glass where eyes should be. They didn't shout. They didn't speak. They were hunters, trained to kill anything that stood in their way, even their own kind. The girl's legs shook. They're here to kill you. The human's voice was calm. Yes. Her voice trembled. Because you saved me. The human shook his head. Because I remember. Before the girl could reply, another sound filled the air. Not metal, not engines. Claws. From the other side of the ruins, the monsters emerged. They crawled over broken walls and through shattered windows, their thin limbs twitching, their wide mouths dripping with thick black liquid. Their empty eyes flickered with hunger, but they were not just hunting for food. They were following the same ancient call. The platform beneath the human and the girl pulsed faintly, the alien rooms glowing brighter, their ancient message spilling into the air like whispered memories. The girl could almost hear it, a language older than either species, speaking of peace, of promises, of something long broken. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. We're trapped. The human's grip tightened around his rifle. No, not yet. He stepped forward, placing his body between the girl and the soldiers. His other hand reached for the device at his belt, but this time he pressed something new. The device glowed bright, brighter than before, sending out a pulse of light that washed over the ruins. The human soldiers stopped. Their helmets flickered. Their weapons lowered for just a second, confusion clouding their orders. They had been told they were coming to hunt a traitor. They had not been told they were walking into the heart of history. The monsters hissed, their thin bodies curling back at the light, their fear of it deep in their bones. They had fed on fear for so long, they could no longer stand the truth. The girl's voice was small, but clear. What is that? The human's voice was grim. The truth. The pulse from the device was not just light. It was memory. The real memory of this place. Not stories twisted by fear. Not lies told by leaders who needed enemies. It was the story of humans and aliens standing side by side, building something greater than either species alone. A promise carved in stone, hidden under centuries of blood and hate. The soldiers hesitated. The monsters howled. And then the silence broke. A human soldier fired first, not at the traitor, but at the monsters. The beam of energy cut through thin limbs and rotting flesh, sending the creature screeching back into the shadows. Another soldier followed, then another. Not all of them understood why, but something in the light, something in the air, made them pause just long enough to see who the real enemy was. The monsters screamed and charged, dozens of them flooding into the ruins, their hunger greater than their fear. The human, the traitor, stood his ground. His rifle roared to life, bright bursts of energy cutting through the dark. He moved fast, his body a blur, covering the girl even as monsters closed in from all sides. One leaped from a broken wall, claws aimed for the girl's throat, but the human's arm blocked it, his armor tearing under the creature's weight. He didn't stop. He didn't slow. Every movement was sharp, practiced, the movements of a man who had fought too long, lost too much, and carried the weight of too many ghosts. The girl could do nothing but watch. She was small, fragile, caught between stories she had been told and the truth she was seeing with her own eyes. The monsters were not her enemy. The humans were not her enemy. Fear itself was the enemy, and fear was the hardest thing to kill. The battle raged around her. Soldiers and monsters, truth and lies, all crashing together in the ruins of a city that remembered everything. Through it all, the human stayed close to her. Every step, every shot, every movement. All of it was to keep her safe. Not because she was important, not because she was special, but because she was proof. Proof that the stories could change. Proof that a human could save an alien. Proof that the truth, no matter how buried, could still fight back. The monsters' screams grew louder as the soldiers pushed them back, the light of the ancient platform growing stronger with each passing second. The girl stood at its center, her small hand resting on the ancient stone, her fingers tracing the same symbols her mother once touched. The human's voice, through the chaos, reached her ears. "Don't forget." She looked up at him, eyes wide, heartbreaking. He was not a hero. He was not a monster. He was just a man trying to make sure one small girl carried the truth forward, even if he did not survive. The light pulsed one last time, and the monsters screamed. The girl knew this was not the end. This was the beginning. The new legend. The sky was silent again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence left behind after the storm, when the wind stops, but the broken pieces of the world still fall through the air, landing softly on blood-stained ground. The girl stood at the edge of the platform, her small body trembling, her fingers still resting on the ancient stone. The light beneath her feet had dimmed, its message fading back into silence, but something remained, something that had not been there before. The truth. She had seen it with her own eyes. Humans and aliens standing side by side, not as enemies, but as builders, friends, partners, maybe even family. It was not a story to scare children. It was a story to build hope. And hope, she realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. The human stood beside her, his armor scorched, his left arm covered in torn metal and dried blood. His rifle hung loosely in his hand, its power nearly drained. His breathing was heavy, but steady, like a machine that had taken too much damage but refused to stop. Around them, the bodies of the monsters lay in twisted piles, thin limbs broken, wide mouths frozen in their final screams. The human soldiers stood farther back, their weapons lowered, their helmets reflecting the pale light of the ruined city. None of them spoke. None of them moved toward the girl or the man they had been sent to kill. Because they had seen it too. They had seen the light. They had felt the truth, the ancient story buried under lies, the history no one wanted them to remember. And for the first time, they saw the human standing before them, not as a traitor, but as something else. A witness. The girl's voice was soft, but it carried across the silence. You knew my mother." The human's helmet turned toward her, the cracked visor hiding the tired eyes she had seen only once before. "I did," he said. She was brave. The girl's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The human's shoulders sank slightly, the weight of too many years pressing down on his battered frame. Because stories are easier to control than truth. The girl didn't fully understand, but she knew enough. Her whole life had been built on fear. Fear of humans, fear of monsters, fear of anything different. And now, that fear had started to crack, like thin ice under her feet. The human stepped back from the platform, his gaze sweeping the ancient ruins one last time. "This place," he said softly, "it remembers everything." The girl looked down at the symbols carved into the stone, her fingers tracing the edges of the alien language. the same language her mother once taught her. But beside those symbols were human words too, scratched in smaller letters, faded but still there. We remember. The human soldiers shifted uneasily, their training fighting against what they had seen. They had come to kill a traitor, but now they stood in a place that made their orders feel small and empty. None of them raised their weapons again. The girl took a step closer to the human, her small voice shaking. What happens now? The human's helmet tilted toward the sky, where the clouds were beginning to clear, showing faint stars above the ruined city. Now, he said quietly, you remember, and you tell them. Tell who? Everyone. The girl's breath caught in her throat. But they won't believe me. The human's voice was gentle, but firm. That doesn't matter. He turned to her fully then, kneeling so their eyes were level. Through the cracked visor, she could almost see his face again. The tired man beneath the armor, the man who had carried the weight of 2 species on his shoulders. Truth isn't about who believes it, he said. It's about keeping it alive, even if no one listens. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Are you leaving? The human's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. The first time he had ever touched her. His grip was strong, but not rough. It was the grip of someone passing something fragile, something too important to drop. I have to, he said. Why? He stood, his gaze turning to the shadows beyond the city, the places where the monsters had come from, the places where more would come. Because the war isn't over, he said. And the truth needs time. The girl wanted to stop him. She wanted to ask him to stay, to tell her more, to explain the parts of the story she still couldn't understand. But deep inside, she knew the human was not made for staying. He was made for walking into the dark, where no one else would go. The human soldiers parted silently as he walked past them, his rifle hanging at his side, his steps slow but certain. None of them tried to stop him. None of them followed. They had seen enough to understand that some orders could not survive the light of truth. The girl stood at the edge of the platform, her fists clenched, her small body trembling. But her heart was stronger now. Because the human had not just saved her. He had given her a story, a new story. The story of the human who saved an alien child. The story of the human who remembered. The girl stood there long after the human disappeared into the forest. The night was quiet again, but not empty. Because now, she carried something no one could take from her. A story worth telling. A story worth remembering. The next day, she returned to her village, covered in dirt and smoke, her eyes darker than before, her voice quieter. The others gathered around her, asking questions, demanding answers. Where did you go? What happened? Did you see the monsters? The girl stood tall, her heart steady, her voice clear. I saw a human. Gasps filled the air, the old fear still strong in their minds. But the girl's voice did not shake. And he didn't eat me. The crowd stared, confused, waiting for the rest. He saved me. The words fell like stones into deep water, sending ripples through the gathered aliens, ripples that would become waves, waves that would one day wash away the old stories and leave space for new ones. Stories of humans and aliens. Stories of peace and promises. Stories of a small alien girl and a scared human who gave her food instead of fear. The girl stood under the stars that night, whispering to the sky, I remember. And somewhere, far beyond the forest, a lone human walked into the dark, a ghost, a legend, a man who carried the weight of history on his back. But this time, he was not alone, because someone remembered.